Welcome to Faith and Coming Out, a conversation on life, belief, and everything. I'm Chaplain Eric Doolittle, and I serve here at North Central College. And today we're being joined in conversation with some of the leaders from our outreach community. And so we're so glad to have you today as we explore faith and coming out. So outreach is North Central College's LGBTQIA and ally community. They strive to use the tools and resources available to the college as they promote understanding and awareness of issues that face our community. And so will you welcome our leaders this morning? Nicole Mendez Villarrubia is a junior at North Central College, pursuing a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Media Communications with minors in Sociology and Gender and Sexuality Studies. She proudly serves as co-president of Outreach, an organization here on our campus that we've talked about. Sophia Hyatt is a senior at North Central, majoring in Religious Studies, minoring in Gender and Sexuality Studies, and is another co-president of Outreach. Sophia is looking at a career at the intersection of social justice and spirituality, and working to support the holistic health of marginalized communities, especially surrounding gender and sexuality. So thank you for being here today. Let's start in a general framework. One of the things we want to recognize is that tomorrow is National Coming Out Day. Why is Coming Out Day such an important event within the LGBTQ community?
Well, Coming Out Day, I feel like represents so much of the queer experience sort of boiled down into one day of celebration. Coming out means so many different things for so many people, and it happens in so many ways. So having a day that's dedicated to a reflection on that very queer and complex experience, I feel like is important to start conversations and think about what it means to be openly queer, what it means to not feel safe to be openly queer. I feel like it's important to the queer experience to have time to reflect on what that means and also celebrate it even in its complexities.
I think that having this day is also kind of a reflection of our current society that makes it a necessity to come out and to draw awareness to issues faced by people as a result of it, because in the ideal society it wouldn't be seen as needing to announce you're not part of this default that is pushed onto you since birth. And so by having Coming Out Day, I think we can appreciate those experiences and the honesty and courage of everyone who does come out, while also recognizing that this concept and having a day surrounding it is kind of highlighting the inequality we face as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I really appreciate the fact that you're talking about not just from an individual standpoint, which I think so many people often think of, is encouraging those folks who are looking at making that step in their life and looking for ways to be supported. But it is that larger sense of a day that recognizes the justice aspect and how people may not, our society may not see people as they are, but automatically kind of think of to put them in a set label or set box. So what can then, just continuing that, I know that part of Outreach's hope is to be a community resource. What can allies do looking at National Coming Out Day? What ways can they support folks, both within the community and maybe folks who are looking for a safe person to talk to?
I feel like knowing that it's okay to not know everything. I know, especially for parents or friends, when someone very close to you comes out to you, there can sometimes be this pressure to know everything and be prepared to assist that person right away. And as a society, we're unfortunately just not set up to know everything. I think it'd be a little bit unfair to expect that of everyone, and just not practical. And so I think listening is the most important aspect, because each queer person's experience with coming out is so wildly different that there's no way to be totally prepared. Even people coming out as the same identity are going to have very different experiences relating to that identity or what they want moving forward after coming out. So being flexible and listening to the person in front of you rather than assuming or that because your Aunt Patty had a neighbor who came out as lesbian a couple of years ago and this is what she wanted, that's what your kid needs. You have to personalize it and recognize that this is the same person that you're talking to, and if you have a good relationship and are able to talk to them about difficult things, just continue that on into this new frame.
Definitely everything Sophia said. I would also add, going off of that point of the individual and your relationship with them, kind of come at it with the same energy that they're coming at it and the way, they like to have conversations, if that makes sense. So if they're coming at it from a very lighthearted, kind of offhand way, or making a joke or talking about a character on the TV and being oh yeah, that's me. Just kind of not make it a serious conversation, but just kind of pay attention to the fact, are they making a statement? Are they inviting a conversation? And it's great to ask questions and try to know someone's experience, but also if you notice they're a little bit closed off, I would say just kind of come at it with something thank you for sharing that with me. I'd like to understand how that has been for you, or what's the best way I can support you. Instead of kind of automatically just asking every question that comes to your mind about everything they've ever done and how it's different now because they've come out to you, and I know I'm saying a lot that can start to sound like word soup and wonder if okay, if I do this, I'm wrong. If I do that, I'm wrong. Honestly, as long as you're supporting them, it's at the core, it's not going to be wrong. There might be some things they wish were different later, but what really matters is that you show up for them in that moment and you continue to show up for them afterwards, because that's what I remember more. Not people's initial reactions, is more how they showed up for me after that.
I really love that idea of making sure you're, as you're supporting the person who's in the middle of this moment, right, and keeping them centered in it and not injecting ourselves, which is a challenge because in an emotional moment, as someone is, learning something new, it can be our reaction to kind of want to process, but that one of the most holy gifts, we can get is intentional listening. And I think in that moment, when we have that moment, when someone is sharing something like that, to be able to lean into our care and love for that person, to say, let's focus on them, there will be time, right, to continue a conversation. This is just a new level in a relationship, whatever that relationship may be, but this is a real sign of trust and care for that person. And so you want to honor that moment. But then I think I really enjoyed the idea of, pay attention to the level they're at, right? Because that's really intentional listening, is not just the words or what it might be, but what's it mean for them? And that can lean into our curiosity as we're listening, is asking questions, how are you feeling in this? And what, it really leans into that idea of being fully present for that person. So thank you for both of those. When one of the things we're going to keep getting into kind of the idea of how this conversation centers in around the religious aspect and the faith aspect. And so religious spaces are not always welcoming to the LGBTQ community. That's been really hard. My own tradition, the United Methodist Church, has a long history of exclusion and is still wrestling with that conversation. This year, we're seeing 6,000 of the 30,000 United Methodist churches in the United States have left because they did not want to move into a space that was more welcoming and inclusive. And so one of the terms that we often hear from students who have different intersections with the church, whether they were raised in the church or maybe they have religious families, is the idea of being church hurt. And so could you unpack that phrase and what that might mean for you or for those who you've been in conversation with?
Well, I also come from a Methodist background, so I relate personally to the frustration of seeing that a community that I both deeply value, but also have a lot of frustrations with, like seeing that sort of slowly develop in front of my eyes. It's very much like a "what are we doing here" sort of feeling. I was not always Methodist. I've always been raised like vaguely Christian, but we didn't have a denomination or a particular church home until I was 15. And I credit that with why I'm able to take criticism from religious people, because I was raised outside of the doctrine for a long time. And so it was kind of startling when I came into a space where suddenly doctrine sometimes seems more important than the people we're actually talking to and life experience. And so that's been very frustrating. You know, it unfolds in so many ways. I sort of had this assumption that like when I came out, I was gonna come out. I did it in a very me way. I talked to a couple of people that I was very close to, and then I'm like, I'm just gonna post about it on Instagram, and then everyone will know, and I'll just get it over with, and they can either be part of my life or they can leave. And I was prepared for that aspect of it, but what's harder is seeing the ways it like slowly unfolds over time. It wasn't that everyone from my church was suddenly like, you're you can't come here anymore. There was nothing overt like that. It happens in these strange, subtle ways. It's almost like learning a new language, where religious folks suddenly don't want to talk about certain aspects of my life, or I'm allowed to be in a public platform only under like certain conditions. If I'm just like performing music and stuff, that's fine. But when I want to have larger conversations about intersectionality, about what we're doing as an institution to support marginalized people, like that sort of stuff breaks your heart almost more than like an overt like screw you, I don't want to talk to you ever again, because that would be easier for me to move on from. It's this sort of pull where it's like I'm trying to engage, but folks just aren't necessarily at my level either of understanding or really caring. So it's sort of that it's really complicated to sort out your own feelings and to understand where are people coming from, what's going on. It's more confusing than the movies will make it look like. It's the living of it is less cinematic and more messy.
Yeah. So in those moments, does it feel like people want to kind of hang on to how they've known you, or they want to kind of just kind of don't talk about that part of who you are? Is that how, like, that's, you know, it's, I think it's important for people to understand beyond just the mechanics of it, but like how that affects people when it feels like you can't fully show up for who you want to be.
Yeah, it's incredibly damaging, because like the things that stick out to me most are, like I had a friend who we were great friends for so many years, and when I came out, she didn't say anything, which I thought was kind of odd, but like at that point in my life, I was like, oh, not saying something bad is fine, like that, we must be good. And then over time, I start to notice that when I bring up certain aspects of myself, it just seems like we don't want to go there. And then there's these weird remarks about other people, but not about me personally. And so there's a way to rationalize it where it's like, oh, she supports me, she's just not saying it. But then there's a hurt there in and of itself. And the subtlety is like even more confusing, because then it puts it on you to dissect what's going on. And so, yeah, I think it's very much that people love me in their own way, and they think that's enough. And that's not my definition of love. Love means loving me as I am, who I am fully, not just how you saw me when I was 15, you know? And so it's challenging because some people might never say overtly, like, I don't like you because you're gay. They might never say that overtly, but having that message underneath all the conversations, and then having to decide for myself, this isn't a friendship, this isn't a friendship anymore. It's not true, it's not honest, and it's not supportive. You know, that's painful, and I think it lets people put the onus on you. Like, I had to decide to leave the friendship because it's easier than someone having to say, I don't like this part of you anymore. And so it's complicated, and it's just a whole new type of disappointment when it's drawn out that long, and when it's with someone who you can tell it's not that they hate you. Mm-hmm. It's not that they're just like, I don't like anything about you. There's something there still, and to see that not be able to go any further, it's just like, it could have been different, and people just aren't willing to go that far.
Yeah, you know, that reminds me of, we were in a space where we were doing some work on difficult conversations several years ago here on the campus, and I brought up the idea that we often use within the Christian tradition of the model that Jesus put forward to, you know, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbors as yourself. And how that, for me, that's been a really important part for me to think about, how am I approaching people? How am I being present for people? Trying to take the same care I would for them that I would hope they would do for myself. But somebody pushed a little bit, and they said, you know, what if what you want, how you would want to be loved, doesn't match up with how they want to be loved? So maybe the standard can be love others as they want to be loved. And I thought that was a really interesting reimagining of that, to center the other person, and to be responsive again, back to listening and paying attention, and not just assuming what they want. That we can't, you know, how are we looking at them fully and wholly and what they might be looking for? So that is hard when it's that personal level, and you're not getting that out. So I want to make sure you had a chance to go back to that idea of church hurt. Did you want to say anything on that?
Yeah, there's so much I can go into, and I'm trying to figure out if I want to start with most recent thoughts when you're talking about friendship and loving someone as they want to be loved, or start from the beginning. It's a little complicated, but I am Puerto Rican, and so I grew up very culturally Catholic. I was baptized. I did my first communion. It started to go downhill from then. But I'm very lucky to have my immediate family have been supportive, and I don't want to say lucky in this way, but I was already kind of distancing myself from the church for other reasons by the time I even had an inkling that I might be queer. And so kind of just seeing a lot of the hypocrisy and hurt they perpetrated towards women, and how it impacted my own family was very it was a lot to process as a preteen and a young teenager. Especially someone who's always tried to be an activist, whatever that meant to them. And so by the time I came out just to close family first, meaning my mom and my sister, and a few friends after that. I think that when it came to those first few people who I knew were going to support me, but it still felt like something I had to do, going back to our conversation on why do we even have coming out day, and why do we have these standards that we have to disprove instead of just kind of living as ourselves. But these are people I trusted and I wanted them to know that part of me, right? And so that went well, like very objectively. But I think a lot of times, um, in our culture, in media, coming out is portrayed as like this, like Sophia was saying, like this cinematic moment. And it's like, okay, you're anxious and then you do it and then you're done. And then you feel this immediate sigh of relief because you're like no longer living a lie or something like that. And that's, again, just not really how it works. And I thought I was supposed to feel better. And I didn't. I felt so strange and twisted up inside and just like this pile of like guilt and shame would not go away. And I was frustrated because I would never hold that against someone else. I would never put those feelings on someone else, but I still had them on myself because of like the religion that I grew up in and the culture. When I say culture, I'm not even saying like Puerto Rican or Latino culture. I'm saying just like broader society, like having grown up like in the continental U.S., just knowing like what perceptions are like of queer people. And so I I wrestled with that for a long time, and it took me a few years before like I like genuinely like actually like loved myself. And part of that was coming to North Central and finding like my community on campus, and also before that like the other queer friends I made, the like relationship I had at that time, like showing me like I was like worthy of being loved but fully. And so this is all a lot of rambling just to say that it, even if I wasn't directly hurt by the church in my moment of coming out, like it did a lot of harm to me that I don't know, like I can never fully be free of, because I've tried to like go back into those spaces and it always feels so strange and wrong being in this place where so many people just don't agree with my rights and my humanity. I, going back to the friend topic, I had a friend who I knew was still like very Catholic, and I came out to her and we were talking one day, and I did know she had like one or two queer friends, and she was like, "Oh, that's fine." Like she's like, "So do you think like my friends in my art classes are straight or something like that?" And she left it off, and I'm like, "Yeah, you're right." And she was like, "No, like I literally don't care about that. Like it doesn't make a difference to me." And I was like, "Okay, thanks." But knowing that, and then kind of how Sophia said, seeing how things progress or didn't progress over time, and seeing how the things she shared on social media, the conversations she had with her family didn't change. I was like the exception to like her standard. And it really definitely, as a few of my friendship had, really came to like a turning point when the 2016 election happened, and then after that, and it was like I see this person who says like they still love me, because she did say that she still loves me, but I see this person who says that and then is advocating for this person who goes against like my humanity as a queer person, my ethnicity, like the race of many of my family members and my friends. And like I couldn't feel loved by that. So as I did, I like commented on a few things. I tried to change the conversation, and she never quite engaged with it or agreed with me. And it came to the point where I found myself distancing myself from that friendship. In fact, one time when I was staying at her house, I went to church, and I was uncomfortable, but I was like, you know what? Like I'm just like, they're going to church. Like I can sit in church for an hour. It's fine. And then the priest starts going off about how like Trump was sent by God to be president, and I'm like, okay. And I felt very awkward sitting there in that like very white central Illinois town. Um, because again, like while I grew up with Catholicism, it was also very much like a cultural thing for me. I went to Spanish mass, and it was more of a like people agree more with the message, like spiritually, than necessarily all these like policies and issues. Um, so then, going back to that friend, I'm jumping around, but that's how it's all, entangled in my mind. I ended up having a conversation with her, and she was like, I know, like, you don't like me because, like, I voted for this person, but it was, like, just, like, on the issue of abortion. And I'm like, okay, well, it doesn't matter what issue you base your vote on if the consequences of that are coming down on people like me and my communities. And I said, I can't, like, you can say you love me, but I can't feel loved. I can't pour my energy into this friendship that, like, is still ultimately, like, going against, like, the core of, like, who I am and what I believe in. So, we stopped being friends. Like, she did thank me for saying it. And she said, I'll still, like, care about you regardless. I'm like, I mean, me too. Like, I don't wish you any ill, but, like, clearly couldn't care about me on the level that I needed. And I ran into her a few years later and her family, and just we said hi, we hugged, but like the way they looked at me, like they didn't need to say anything for me to know, like they perceived me as such a different person. And I know in that time, I know like she originally hadn't like shared that about me with her parents, but I'm pretty certain it came out later, it came out after we hadn't really been friends, which is like, again, the way I was perceived, like I could just, they were going through the motions, but like I could see the disdain in like their faces and their actions. And it was a really uncomfortable feeling even at this point. This was just like a year ago actually that I ran into them, and like I've been very confident, very out, a leader on campus. And so I think that church hurt doesn't go away when you leave a church environment, when you leave friendships, like it's still like going to be affecting you. And like sometimes at the holidays, I'm like, I feel like I should be at church right now, but that's not something I can do. And that's, I guess that's where I stand on church hurt.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that it's difficult for a lot of folks to recognize how how we function across these different spaces, and when there are disconnects, right? We all have these disconnects between who we want to be and then how we might be in different spaces. And I think that what you're capturing within your stories is also kind of a discussion and debate we see in a lot of congregations or religious establishments, which is like, well, you as a person, we love you, but we're not going to necessarily accept you as fully as we would someone else. But if we're, it's almost a modern version of the don't ask, don't tell policy, right? Like saying, well, you are of course welcome. We want you to leave this piece aside, and then never address it. When we think about that in a setting with other spaces and other people, other pieces of a person's identity, we would be very forthcoming to say, well, that's not really fully loving. That's being unjust, right? If we were withholding full participation within a community to a person because of their ethnic background or their country of origin, which are, things that religious institutions have also wrestled with. So what do you think is the hope then? Do you have a space like, how can people who are within religious communities or who may identify, as Christian or another tradition, how can they what advice would you have for them as they're trying to learn how to wrestle with that tension of how do we fully accept or how do we balance this out with our traditions? Or, like, what would that look like for you? What would you be able to offer to invite them into a deeper relationship? Also recognizing that that might not be the thing that does you the best, right? That's that balance.
Yeah, speaking as someone who still considers myself Christian with sometimes an asterisk, I think for queer folks who are still feeling some sort of call to either spirituality or Christianity and still have a longing for these sorts of spaces, if there's a voice inside of you saying that you deserve more, that's probably the case. Like, if you're going to church and you're like, well, people don't hate me. People actually want me to be here, but you're not being spiritually fulfilled. I think it's okay to recognize that certain people are just incapable of meeting your needs right now. And that doesn't mean you don't love them. It doesn't mean you don't value the communities you've come from. It means that you're recognizing the value that God has placed in you as well. And you deserve to be cared for and loved and have your wider community embraced without weird exceptions or caveats or, well, we'll talk to you privately in our office and say we love you, but we're too scared to say it, at the pulpit because it might cause tension. You deserve to be publicly, fully loved with all the implications that brings. And to recognize that this is my church cliches now. But, there's this saying of like, oh, where two or more are gathered, like that is where Christ and the Spirit are present, In recent years, I go to church still in different ways, but I think outreach is church for me. I think hanging out with Nicole and talking about, what we've been going through and loving each other honestly, like wishing the best for my community is like a form of prayer, and like activism is a form of service. And so recognizing that these things that you value, even if it looks non-traditional, the Spirit is still there, the love is still there, and you can find the things that you loved about church in ways that don't ask you to leave part of yourself behind.
That's very powerful, and that's definitely like, I feel most welcomed and like most whole when I'm in a community of people that like support me, like without any asterisk, without any like exceptions or things not to pay attention to. But I think going off what Sophia said is also the notion that for a lot of people like me, it actually has been healing in a way to see people who are still involved in those communities, to see Sophia and my other Christian friends advocating for change in those spaces they're in, which even though I don't feel like that's somewhere I can participate again, probably ever, but at least, for now, it just definitely has done something to like shift my perspective of like what Christians are and what Christians can be, what those spaces can be. So just like seeing that your friends that are still involved in certain like religious traditions are kind of committed to opening up those conversations within their spaces, because I honestly, like, it astonishes me, like, the energy. I don't know where Sophia draws from, and I know it's because, like,
Anger.
ultimately, yeah, that she cares, like, so much that she'll put the energy in to make it better, and that kind of keeps her going. But just, seeing that dedication and seeing, like, how it can be powerful to not leave, to stay and try to make it better. It's no one's like responsibility, or you shouldn't feel like that's like a chore hanging over you that you need to do if what you need is space. But like knowing that some of us need space and others of us are still going to be there advocating for those things so that can hopefully like change for the better. I think is very
Yeah, I think that goes back to that idea of listening. Where are the people, and how do we meet them where they're at and recognize kind of what they might need? Recognizing the ongoing struggles that some people feel, the internal, uh, trying to seek emotional and spiritual wellness in the midst of trauma and hurt. And what can we do with that, and how can we be attentive to that? So I think that's an important piece. I think the other one is that idea of who do we invite into the conversation. For me, the history of the church has always been a redefining of what it means to be part of the community. And so Jesus stretched those folks around him to say, hey, there are others who you have excluded who deserve to be recognized and seen and fully loved. And there was much discussion about what that would be. And right after, at the earliest moments of the church, there was discussion between Paul and the other disciples about what about Gentiles? Do we reach out to them? And that has been an ongoing conversation for the Christian community to understand how do we continue to reach out and show love as much as we can, and that ongoing dialogue that needs to happen internally, but also externally, to hear voices of those who do feel like they're being pushed away or excluded, so that we can hear what that feels like. And so thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your thoughts. It's really been a pleasure, and I hope other folks, as they see this conversation, can hear with new hearts of what that experience can feel like. And so thank you so much for being part of that. Thanks to all of you for being here with us today. We're so glad you got to join us. And for those of you who are joining us online and watching this later, I hope you'll take a moment and share your questions and comments in the video space below. We hope these are the starts of conversations, and we know that this will be a space that hopefully can be a great tool for you too. So thank you for being part of Faith and Today, and we will leave it there.